I'm Dean Revell. I'm an animal research scientist and particularly interested in nutrition and grazing behaviour management. Starting anything new or a little bit different, you want to be able to do it in a way that isn't compromising profit in the meantime. So stepping your way through and starting at a small scale and understanding what's working well in your system and what might be better and what might be worse is very much the way to get a new practice incorporated into your farming system. Bear in mind that with some of these things, like adding a perennial component, there's a little bit of a Goldilocks story in there, that you need enough but not too much. So when you're starting off on a small scale and getting a feel for it, the maximum benefit to whole farm profit of the whole system may not yet be realised, but you are learning, your livestock are learning as well, building to that point. So that would very much be a suggestion, is to steady as she goes, start small with a plan to get to a point that is of a sufficient scale for it to really have an impact for annual utilisation on your farm, and if not annual, twice a year. We've learnt that doesn't compromise the productivity of the shrubs. It has to be at a sufficient scale that it's not just an incidental little troublesome plot. You want to build it very much into an annual farm plan. I guess just in thinking about the questions of why, how and where are really important when thinking about adding a perennial shrub system. And again, the system is the shrubs and the annual based pastures as well. Crop stubbles, all of that part of the same system. It's really important to think about what are you trying to achieve. So the why question is the first one and the most important. What are you trying to achieve? Because that then determines the sorts of follow-on questions about the spatial layout. What sort of size interrow is ideal? What are the plant species that I should be choosing? And when should I use them? So if you can think clearly about why you want to do it, the follow-on questions about where and spatial layout to some extent answer themselves. But the other thing to build into the thinking is whereabouts in the farming landscape are these areas where other options are limited, because if they're little patches here and there, it might be quite difficult to integrate them into a grazing system because they're too far apart and they're too small. They're not easy. So maybe in that case the prime motivation is in for wind erosion control or groundwater use, preventing or managing salinity issues. And they're very good reasons, but at least you know your expectations from a grazing point of view may be less than you might have thought. But if you've got larger areas or can connect them or can move animals between different areas, it really opens up those opportunities to truly build in those natural resource management outcomes with grazing management, feed resource management and animal nutrition, and therefore animal productivity. And that's important to think about as well. What's the scale you want to head to and how you're going to link these different parts of the farm, which won't all be in one paddock, they'll be scattered in different parts. The grazing animals will need to have a range of plants in their diet for a number of reasons. It effectively is the only way they can get the nutrients they need over time when their requirements change and when seasonal conditions change. No single plant can do the job for them under all circumstances. And even if you look at one plant species that changes so frequently and to such a great extent over time, they have to be bringing in other plants to complement that over time. So their nutrient requirements are variable, the plant characteristics are variable. How do they deal with that? It's by putting together bits and pieces from a range of different species. The other reason it's advantageous for them to have different components in their diet, different plants or different supplements, whatever it might be, is for complementary effects, that it's not just 1 + 1 always equaling 2. It can be the protein in one matching the source, the fibre in another. And so they are additive effects, in fact multiplier effects. We're getting an added advantage. The other reason is for boosting intake. So productivity of animals is heavily dependent on how much they eat. But often we talk, and think of it in our own world, that we'll be full on a particular type of food, but it doesn't mean we can't eat something else. And an animal is exactly the same. It will reach a limit on one food that sets its limit for that food, but it doesn't mean it can't increase total intake by consuming something else which supplies a different range of nutrients, less of the one that was limiting further consumption before and supplying missing nutrients from the other. So we can boost intake by having a greater range of options. And the other reason is for mixing and getting a range of components into the diet is it's the way they can deal with plant toxins. All plants contain toxins, but those same chemical compounds can be medicinal at lower levels. And plants have to defend themselves. Even our agricultural plants will have things in them that are not ideal for animals when eaten in large amounts, but are absolutely fine and probably beneficial at lower levels. And the only way you can manage that from an animal's point of view is to eat a range of different plants. So if we're interested in getting a diversity of feed resources onto farms in a way that can allow us to cope with difficult seasonal conditions but also capitalise on good seasonal conditions, I think there's value in thinking about adding different feed resources to what we've already got. And it's really important to think about what can we add rather than what can we substitute. So we've spent a number of years and people from across Australia looking at the potential of adding forage shrubs, perennial Australian species that fit our climatic patterns, can tolerate difficult conditions but also perform well and supply nutrients for grazing livestock at a time of year where they're most deficient in energy and nutrients. So that's a really important component, is when are the extra nutrients provided going to be of most benefit based on what we've already got. And if we can introduce plants that are providing digestible nutrients in the so-called out-of-season period, through autumn up to and through the break of season and indeed in early winter, then it's an extra resource that we often don't have enough of at present. And importantly, it has to fit into the whole farm system and it has to allow normal management practices to proceed as well and in fact be better off with that new addition. From a feeding system that provides nutrients all year round, that's the ideal system to develop. Doesn't mean it's the same plant all year round, but how do you mix and match the various options? A gap is in the perennial plant that provides food in that summer, autumn, early winter period. And in other parts of Australia there are a range of options, but in our difficult environment in this catchment it would be that perennial options plural. I think we really want to create opportunities by having more than a reliance on just one. It's to have a perennial plant that can persist and supply nutrients at that time of year and not be so heavily dependent on a summer rainfall event to ensure survival and productivity. But should that event occur, it makes use of it and responds and is an added bonus. So it's really a plant that can tolerate our annual droughts, ideally cope with an extended drought as well, but all plants will struggle in an extended drought. That's just the reality. There's nothing miraculous about them, but it's providing a perennial option where there really are few current other options. So in designing, if we can use that term, a feeding system that has year-round components, there's two parts. One is providing the options, so having them available and establishing them and having them in the farm system, obviously the first and critical one. But just as importantly is having it there is the start, but animals have to use it appropriately, with good, easy to manage systems and performing well enough on it. So when we add a different feed resource in, particularly something that's quite different in the way animals access it, so a shrub which requires a different grazing behaviour than conventional pastures, they have to learn how to use it. And once they've learnt, then it builds a grazing behaviour and a culture, if you like, amongst the mob that can persist. But in that early exposure where animals might be put onto a shrub-based system for the first time, we can help them to figure out the benefits of including it in their diet rather than hoping they do it for themselves. Once they've learnt it, they can do it for themselves, but we can help them in that initial stage. And one of the key approaches that we've learnt is, well, there's a few, but getting a bit of grazing pressure, so increasing stocking rate is advantageous. That isn't always a great option from a practical point of view, but it's worth considering wherever you can do it. But another is to take animals from one patch to another, or one paddock to another, or strip grazing with electric fence if that's an option for you, and moving them onto fresh plots before they run out of any of the components. What we used to think was, let them eat the good bits and they'll learn to eat the leftovers and then you'll be okay. But that's not a good outcome for multiple reasons. We've learned it's much better to move animals before they run out. They'll learn to incorporate a broader range of plants into their diet and mix and match better rather than eating the best and leaving the rest. So there's some really simple strategies what you could envisage of providing lessons, if you like, in inverted commas, for animals to learn about the diversity and then incorporate it by themselves into their diet. All of these strategies of adding a new feed resource, managing the animals to make use of it, providing that access and utilisation at the key time of year, is driven by increased productivity and profit without large burdens on cost and labour. We don't want extra jobs when we're all busy, so it has to fit into the whole farm system. But it is driven by a motivation for more profitable and resilient, less risky production systems. And we shouldn't think that a more profitable system is necessarily going to be one that's riskier from a natural resource management point of view. There are things we can do that couple those together and they work very much hand in hand. Better natural resource management outcomes and increased productivity. And when you think about it, it's the natural resource base that fuels that drives the productivity and the profitability. So let's put them together in our thinking, not put them apart. So there are certainly pockets of adoption where people are incorporating shrubs into their farming systems, very widely adopted in saline systems where there are a few other options. Well understood, productive, useful saltland grazing systems with old man saltbush as the base. And that, absolutely key land utilisation and boost to whole farm profit in that system. And we can learn from that and not think it has to only be on salt land. There are other parts of the farm where opportunities for other enterprises, particularly cropping, may not be stacking up like they once were for various reasons. When we term that landscape as marginal, it doesn't mean it's not available for a different type of use. It shouldn't be marginal if we're using it appropriately. So I think there are opportunities for increasing the areas that are planted to a perennial shrub-based system, and that includes the annual pastures that grow with them. Really important to remember, it is as much about the shrubs as the pasture. The pasture supplements the shrubs supplement the pasture. So that there is scope. We've still got a lot to learn. There's still cost of establishment issues, so it's not all done and dusted and just go away and do it. We can still learn continuously, but we can learn by doing. We know enough for us to start and get on board and have our eyes open for new ways and modifications as we go. There's a couple of important things to think about from a whole farm system point of view with the addition of a perennial component, whether that's a shrub or anything else. And that is to not think about and value the paddock where you have it in its own right. It's very much about what it allows you to do in other parts of the farm. And as a rule of thumb, half the benefit of the perennial shrub systems is through reduced supplementary feeding in the so-called out-of-season period, autumn through break of season. But equally important is the opportunity for deferment of grazing on other parts of the farm. And it's of financially the same magnitude because of the extra productivity you can get on other parts of the farm by grazing your livestock on the perennial based shrub system. And that's a really important thing to be thinking about, and the true value is not just the paddock itself and the supplementary feed savings, but what is it allowing you to do, getting better establishment of, for example, annual legume based pastures by deferring the grazing through until they're better established and more vigorous, allowing you, for example, to have a higher stocking rate through those winter and spring months.